Professor Pam with Jumpstart Code. This video is going to walk you through a JavaScript project that is going to create a simple adder. We will use techniques of getting information from input boxes and putting information into HTML elements. So this is what I want it to look like. You need to always start with a sketch of what you're trying to accomplish, because that is going to determine how you create your HTML file. So what I've got here, I've got an H2 element for this header. I am going to allow you to type in numbers into these two input boxes. Here's a label for the plus sign, and there's actually a blank label here. In order to be able to line these things up, sometimes you need to add additional elements. So I'm going to show you that. I've got a little line here, a button that you click to actually get the sum, a button that you click for clear, and there's nothing here, but this is going to be where the answer is going to go. And that is going to be a span element, because I want these things to all be in line together. So that's what I want to look like. Let me show you what the HTML file looks like right now. So here is, I have a div around everything because I'm going to do some styling, and that's going to be useful for my styling. And so that div is called main. That's just like a box. Inside, here's the H2, my adder. Here's an empty label. You'll see in a second why that's there. Here's an input. I give it an ID of num1. Remember, IDs have to be unique, and you want them to be meaningful. That tells you something about the data that's going to be in them. It's text, and I'm just giving it a size of 5. That's as big as you can type in. Then a break to go to the next line. Here's the label with the plus sign. Here's the other input. This is how you get the line. The HR element is a line. Then I have a button that when you click the button, we're going to look for an add function in JavaScript. And equal is what's going to display on the button. Here's the span, ID equals sum, and that is where the answer is going to go. You see I put a 0 in it just to start. And then another button, when you click this button, it's going to look for a JavaScript function called reset, and the words say clear. So here is what this currently looks like with no styling associated with it. So the first thing we're going to do before we work on the JavaScript, we're going to actually apply some styling. So you see here, again, the overall structure of my document. I've got my HTML section. I've got my head section. I actually should indent all of this. There you go. That's more properly indented. Inside HTML is my head section with the title and a link to a style sheet. And then my JavaScript will be connected here at the very end before the body closes. And this is the name of my JavaScript file. So we'll get to the JavaScript in a second. We're going to start with the style. So over here, the first thing I'm going to do is style my body. I'm going to give it a background color. We'll give it just something like that, right? Because before I do anything else, I want to make sure that worked. I want to make sure that it's connected, right? You see, when I saved, I saw the change here. Because if for some reason, for example, over here, if this said styles.css, then it's not connected, right? So the first thing that I want to do is make sure before I start adding a lot of things in there that this file is actually connected. I am going to give it a border, 1 pixel, solid black. Again, as I make changes here in VS Code, I can see what's going on. Now you'll notice that border, that size of that is whatever is the width of my page. So actually I want to limit the width of this. So I'm going to give it a width my body a width of 200 pixels, and you can always just play around with these numbers. So let's see what that does. So you see now my border is just around there. Let's put in some padding of 10 pixels. Remember, padding is inside the border. So do you see everything kind of moved in a little bit? I'm going to add a font family of cursive. Again, each time I'm checking, so I have that. I'm going to add a margin of 10 pixels. All right, so we've got that. All right, so this header here, my H2, right, my adder, I want to center that. So I'm going to say H2 text align center. And you see that that's now centered. It looks like there's a lot of space here at the top. Sometimes I like to do this to see what's exactly going on. I'm going to give this a border 1 pixel dotted black so I can just see my H2. And there's a big margin there at the top. I think I can reduce that by saying margin top. Let's just make it like 5 pixels. Right, so you see I changed just the top margin. So this is again why you need to kind of work on things one thing at a time and make these little small adjustments. So I really don't want this border now. I'll take it off. That's just a way to kind of see the bounds of your element. All right, so over here, you see that before each input, there's a label. And so labels, you're able to give a display style of inline block. And if you do that, you can apply a width. Now I'm going to show you the width only works if you do that, because if I just say width, let's say 40 pixels, nothing changed. But if in addition to that, if I just say display inline block, then now I am able to apply a width to the label. And so even though one of them is blank, it's going to have that fixed width, right? If I want to make that plus sign a little bigger, I can say font size, I'm going to say 1.2 EM. So 20% bigger than the normal font size, right? If I said 1.5. So again, get used to when you're doing this kind of stuff, you often want to do a little bit of playing around with the numbers. And I can say text align center if I want to, and kind of center that over. All right, so let us now, my input elements. So do you see that's what that would look like? Now these are going to be numbers. I'm going to type in numbers. And so I might want them to align to the right. So my input elements, I'm going to say text align right. So now when I type in here, you see everything is going to be aligned to the right. And if I want a little space around what I'm typing in, or between my boxes, I'm going to say margin 5 pixels. When you just say margin, that's going to be margin all the way around. So you see it moved them apart a little bit more. All right, these buttons, I want to make them, style them a little bit. So I'm going to give them a width of 40 pixels. And if I wanted to change the color of them, for example, background color, my color choices are not always good. Let's just do, I don't know that. Yeah, there you go. And the span element that is between them, I'm going to text align right. I also want to give it a width, and in order to give it a width, I'm going to have to give it a display of inline block and a width of 50 pixels. So again, the width wouldn't work unless I make it inline block. So you see we have that. I might want to make it a little bit, let's make it 60. I want to try to align these over. And often this is what you do. It's a little bit of trial and error to get things lined up the way you want to. And if I want to move that button over, the clear button over a little bit, I can say margin right 10 pixels. And you see it moved it over, right? Maybe I make it 20. Okay, so there we go. There's what my current page looks like in terms of styling. All right, so now we need to work on the JavaScript for this particular file. So let's work on our JavaScript. So over here, I'm attached to a file called adder.js. So I have set that file up. And the first two things I always do is use strict so that I will enforce the fact that you have to declare your variables. And I want to make sure that it's connected. So let's save all. And you see my alert pops up. Again, that's important because if it's not connected, if I go over here, if I forget, for example, to put the .js, okay, and I save this, if I don't see that alert pop up, then that's not connected. And that means no matter what I type in this file, it's not going to be executed. So you need to first of all confirm. You've got to trust nothing until you test it. All right. So now that I know that it's connected, I'm going to get rid of that because I just don't want that pop-up to come up all the time. Okay, so now we need to write the function to execute when equal is clicked. So remember over here in index.html, we said, here's my equal. When you click that function, you're going to look for a function called add. So I need to write an add function. And it's going to start like this. Now, the first thing that I want to do is make sure that I connected that correctly. So I'm going to over here right click and go to inspect because I'm about to start using my console a lot to verify and make sure what's going on. And so the first thing that I'm going to put in this add is I'm going to say console.log equal clicked, or just something so you know. So I'm going to save, and then over here, if I click this button, I get that message. If I didn't get the message, then that means something's wrong with the way this function is set up, and I need to discover that now before I do anything else. All right, now that I know, so I'm going to put verify that button is connected to this function, right? So as I verify things, I often like to just comment that out. So now what do I need to do? I need to get the two numbers from the input box. So I need to create variables. So I'm going to say constant num1 equals, I'm using a constant because I'm not going to change these input numbers at all. And I'll say document.get element by ID num1 dot value. Okay, and sometimes if it makes a correction like that, that's not what I wanted. I just want dot value. So what I've said is go find this element that has an ID of num1 and give me the data that is inside of it. Notice the capital E, the capital B, the capital I. That's all very important. So let's log it to see if that worked. I'm going to say num1 is, and the plus sign, which is concatenation, and I'm going to print out whatever that is, right? So I put in a number here, and I click equal, and it says num1 is 4. So it looks like I'm good, right? So let's get the other number. So I'm going to say constant num2 equals document get element by ID num2 dot value. For a text box, you use value. We could log it again and make sure, but I'm going to kind of move on here. So once I have my two numbers, what do I want to do? I need to calculate the sum. So I'm going to create a variable, let. I could use constant. I'm just showing you guys two different ways to create variables using constant and let. Sum equal num1 plus num2. And let's check it. So console log sum is, because we're going to find there's a little problem here. Right? So I'll put in 10 plus 5, and I got 105. So instead of adding these two numbers together, it glued them together. And that's because the plus operator is because these two variables right now, JavaScript thinks the data type of these variables is a string. If I were to console log type of num1, then it tells me string. So even though I typed in a number, it is interpreted as a string unless I do something to change that. So I am going to use parse int. If I do that, then I can only type in integers. If I want to type in double numbers, we would use parse float. So notice I had to put parse int around that entire thing. And now let's see what happens to the type of. So I put in a number. You see now it understands that it is a number. Okay, so we need to do that in both cases. And I could either, so I can do it this way, right? So I have to change, I have to also make this one parse int. And we're going to put it around the entire thing. We are saying take this string value and convert it to a number. So now if I put in 5 and 6, so now it's a number and my sum is 11. So I know that my sum is correct. Okay, so now I want to display it on the page. And you see how I'm putting comments to be clear about what it is that I'm doing step by step. Display answer in span on the page. So I'm going to say document get element by ID sum, because that was the name of that span. I use .inner text. We can use .inner text or we can use .inner HTML equals sum. So I'm assigning whatever that result was to that element on the page. So now if I put in 10 and 5, you see there's my answer that comes in there. Now, so that's all good, but there's a couple of things that we need to recognize will be problems. First of all, if I put in one number and not a second number, looks like there's something very strange going on. Also, if I were to put in a letter and a number, there's something very strange going on. This NaN stands for not a number. So if I have a W and we try to parse that into an int, there's no way to do that. So what we need to do is some error checking. So after we get our two numbers here, I need to validate that input is good before I continue. So we're going to add an if statement. So we're going to say if is NaN. Notice the capital letters. If num1 is not a number, if that's true, if that's the case, it's going to return a true. Or is NaN num2. So if either one of these numbers, these inputs, are not a number, I'm going to give an error message. Input must be two numbers. Okay? But if this is false, I only want to do all the rest of this code if this condition is false. So I need to add an else here, and the closing of this else has to go here at the closing of all this. So in other words, if the input is bad, right? This is bad input. Give error message. Else, this means good input. Process it. And so it's very important where you put these curly brackets to group together those two things. So let's save this and do some testing here. First, let's test good numbers. Let's make sure it still works for good numbers. So that works. We haven't done our clear button yet, so I'm just going to refresh the page. If I were to put in one number and not another, you see I get an error message here. Input must be two numbers. If I put in a number and a letter, input must be two numbers, right? All right, so it looks like that's working. Let's add one more thing. Let's add our reset function to clear the page. When I click on this clear button, right, function to clear. So that's going to be function reset, because that's the name that I gave over here. I said look for a function called reset. All right, so what I need to do is clear the two inputs and the span. What that just means is I need to put a blank in there, an empty, right? So document.getElement by ID num1 dot value equals, so an empty string. That's what I'm doing. And notice you have to put that in a set of quotes. I need to do the same thing with num2, but for the span, document get element by ID sum dot inner text, because it's a different kind of an element, equals, maybe I just want to, if you want to put a 0 in there, you could. I'm just going to make it an empty. All right. So let's save. So now if I put in 3344, right? If I click clear, it's emptied. So another thing that I might want to do, because if I put in, bad input and I do this, I might want to clear these boxes out. So I can use this reset function here after I tell you input must be two numbers. Now, if it turns out one of my numbers was good and one was bad, I'm clearing them both. I understand that. But just to show you guys that you can call a function from another function, then notice I've added this in here, clear the inputs. So I can call that function. So now I'll save and I'll put in, a missing number. So yeah, I got to go replace my number that's missing, and I can clear here. If I put in something like that, I get the message, it clears them out, and yes, I have to put them in again. There are ways we could code this. If we check each one of these individually, then we could deal with just that one and only clear the one that is bad. But just for this first simple example, I want you to just see how you can do that. So here's our complete JavaScript code. So we wrote two functions. One function that gets called when I click the equal button, I get the input, I validate it, and then I process it and I show the answer. And then I have a second function that gets called when you clear the page. And using your console over here and console.log statements are a very important part of the process of writing JavaScript.